the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where we champion education, celebrate community, and unite the very best of humanity. Fueled by world-class military precision and cultural excellence, Washington Tattoo produces unforgettable, immersive experiences, creating an atmosphere for people, organizations, and businesses to connect, network, and build impactful relationships. We invite you to listen to this episode of the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where the world's musical traditions come to life. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Chris Thomson, welcome to the Washington Tattoo Podcast. This is something we have been chatting about for quite some time now, but I think even over the time we've communicated trying to organize this event, you and I become closer and closer friends.
Yeah.
And even from our families getting to know each other and the work that you do and the work that the Washington Tattoo has done, I honestly just feel so connected to you as a human being, the work that you do. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us on the podcast.
Oh, I appreciate that, Mark, and wholly reflect the fact that the time that we spent together, from meeting you early in my time here in the US, right through more than 2 years later, has been a real journey. I've seen the tattoo grow and mature and develop, and I've been really, really pleased that I've been able to support, my team's been able to support, and again, that we as people have become closer, and our families are actually now intertwined. It's a lovely thing. It's a lovely thing.
Well, and I do believe, I mean, we first met within your first month, I think, of being here, right?
Yeah.
And I do have to say the tattoo would not be anywhere where it is today if it were not for your support, your guidance and help, and we will be forever grateful, obviously, to the Scottish government, but to you and your skill set in figuring out who to talk to, how to talk, what is the right way to do it, and honestly, how do we keep this organic and authentic the whole way through. So I just really want to say thank you for that.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but as you know, I don't want to take a huge amount of credit for it. We talked before about some of the sponsorship and some of the support that you've got from elsewhere, and a lot of that times, my role has been to help you guys by cracking open a door a little bit, but you and the team and the skill set that you've got have been the ones pushing those doors fully open and running right through them. So you've got a lot of credit to you and the team for the amazing work you've done.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I really, really, really appreciate it. So definitely, we have some questions here, but obviously, if the conversation decides it wants to go where we want to take it, we can keep it really relaxed. But I really would love to just start, about you and just, where you grew up, how you got into the role you got into, and then kind of what got you from Scotland to here in Washington in your journey.
Oh, that's a long story. I'll try and give you the truncated version. So I grew up in sort of west central Scotland, near Glasgow. One of the things that immediately connected me to you is I come from a musical family. My dad has just retired after over 50 years as a professional musician, as a drummer, so hello, Dad. I grew up playing instruments. I played brass, I played anything with strings as well. Really enjoyed it, so did my brothers as well. So come from a musical background. I went to the University of Glasgow, first of all, and then later, I am wearing my University of the West of Scotland tie today. I also went to the University of West of Scotland. I was very fortunate to be supported by great academic institutions, which then helped me go into work. I started out in the private sector for a few years, but I felt I had a calling to work in public service. And I worked through various agencies in mental health, in justice, and in prisons before I joined the Scottish Government. I worked for a number of years in economic development. It's a real passion of mine to see particularly areas that have suffered from deindustrialisation and deprivation, to try and bring them up and bring people to have better outcomes. We know very well that better economic outcomes or better health outcomes, there are also better life outcomes for people. So it's a thing that's been very important to me. And again, something that begins to run into the work of the tattoo in terms of bringing people up. So that's how I ended up in the Scottish Government. And once I was there, we had obviously the horrible COVID crisis.
Right.
I was sitting at home one day, and an advert came up in the internal pages of the Scottish Government saying there was a role in Washington DC. And I'd never thought about working internationally for the Scottish Government, but I thought someone's got to do it. Why not me? With a very quick turnaround, I found myself, I think 3 months later, I found myself arriving here in DC, and then a month later, being introduced to you. And it's been a roller coaster, but a very, very good one ever since.
I love it. And honestly, I have to do a shout out to Stuart McLaurin for this, because he is just the master connector behind so many wonderful projects. And he, I think, is how we first got connected.
It definitely was, Stuart. And he's been a fantastic friend and asset for us ever since I've been here.
Right. And the White House Historical Association has so many wonderful projects and so many ways on how the American story can connect around the world. But I think specifically, he always brings up the topic of the Scottish stonemasons coming from Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very powerful connection, obviously between, you and I as friends now, but the Royal Edinburgh military tattoo, the connection to the White House, the stonemasons, and I think that puts you in a very unique position here in Washington. And so during your time here in Washington, what were some of the wins or the challenges that you first came into as your role started to develop?
Well, I think COVID was one of the big challenges at first. We're here in the British Embassy. My team's hosted by the UK government, and the British ambassador is in charge here at the embassy. She often says that diplomacy is a contact sport. It's not something you can do from behind a desk. If you could, they'd probably have me back in Glasgow rather than here in DC. COVID stopped us doing a lot of things in person. It was a huge problem for everyone on multiple levels, whether it was education, whether it was social contact, or whether it was diplomacy. Right. So that was a huge barrier for us to get over in the first instance. Some of the things that helped us get over it are people like Stuart making connections. Making connections to people like you. A lovely Scots community in across the US really reached out and embraced us. So that was a hugely, hugely positive thing. But since then, meeting politicians in the US from across both sides of the aisle, really senior politicians, talking to people I never thought I'd be able to talk to. These have been huge honours for me. And being able to represent Scotland at big events and out with the Scottish community has been an absolute joy and a privilege for me.
It's amazing. It's also very interesting to see the connections between the different states and the diaspora. And those large events, I mean, we've connected at different points in Washington, but also in New York. And very strange, I'm from New York, but I've lived in DC so many years now that it's funny to kind of go back and almost reminisce on, the big parades that do happen in New York. And there's definitely a connection, obviously, with the millions of people in the United States that have Scottish lineage or Scottish ancestry. But what I find to be the most interesting is that there's a Friends of Scotland caucus that's also here in Washington. And so I know there's an event we call Tartan Day, but could you speak a little bit about the relationship and maybe what Tartan Day is?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So Tartan Day, a lot of people think it's about celebrating Scotland. It's actually about celebrating the contribution of Scots and Scots Americans to the US. It started in Canada, it was adopted in the US. There have been presidential, House and Senate resolutions around Tartan Day, which is the 6th of April, which coincides with the 6th of April date of the Declaration of Arbroath, which lots of people refer to as Scotland's Declaration of Independence. Slightly different situation at the time, but a nice link and a nice bit of inspiration. So it has grown now. It includes events in DC, which we have put on with you in recent years, and which have been fantastic. And when you talk about highlights of my time here, the event we had earlier this year at the embassy was utterly incredible.
Thank you.
And the opportunity to connect internationally and actually recognise the Ukrainian defence attaché who was there. We had the Ukrainian anthem sung, we had a Ukrainian soprano. It was visibly moving for the Ukrainian team and for me as well. It was an incredible thing. So this warmth, this affection for Scotland has grown through Tartan Day and what is now Tartan Week.
Right.
So we have events here in DC. There are Scottish societies throughout the US who have events, whether that's in LA, Texas, Boston, Chicago. There's events going everywhere, and the biggest one is in New York, where we have the culminates in the Tartan Day Parade, which this year had something in the order of 50,000 people in the streets and many thousands in the parade. It is a huge, huge fun event, but it ties back. It's about celebrating that contribution and that connection. You mentioned the stonemasons at the White House. That's a great example of how Scots have been involved in the USA from its very inception. There were Scots who signed the Declaration of Independence, Scots who signed the Constitution, and you think of names like Buick, Carnegie, Forbes.
Yeah.
These are all Scots who came to America and helped shape it.
I love it.
And that connection goes on today through things like the Friends of Scotland caucus. We've got, I think, more than 30 members now across there. And again, bipartisan, people who are interested in Scotland from a policy perspective, from a diaspora perspective. Perhaps they've got heritage themselves, or perhaps business perspective. We've got people from, particularly who work in whiskey producing states.
Sure.
There's a big read across there with Scotch whiskey, bourbon and rye. So there's something in there for everyone. And I'm firmly of the view that you can be born Scottish, you can have Scottish heritage, or you can choose to be Scottish. And each one of them is valid, each one of them is welcome. And the last one in particular is a compliment for people in Scotland.
I think that is absolutely incredible, because there are people, and I mean, these comments can go a million different ways, but they feel this connection, especially when you go back to, the movies like Rob Roy, Braveheart, and of course now Outlander, and you see, the folks from Outlander now have whiskey brands, and they're coming into Kentucky and Tennessee. And so, I mean, there has to be this really strong relationship, I would imagine, between the original Scots who came over to the United States and then started to expand what they did in New York. Are there organizations in the United States that have Scottish lineage that, like, an individual can get involved in?
Oh, there are a lot, yeah. And, we work with a lot of these organizations, and we know that there are a lot more out there who don't come to my office. I've only got a small team. We can't connect to every one of them. I wish we could.
Right.
One of the projects that we actually have ongoing through a piece of work called Scottish Connections is to create a database of all these Scottish organisations, and we welcome those Scottish organisations coming and talking to us, telling us who they are. We will put that on our Scottish homepage, which is scotland.org, and people can go and find local societies and engage with them. And these societies do huge amounts of great work, from scholarship support through charity support in the community. The Chicago Scots, who I visited this week up in Chicago, are actually the oldest charity in the state of Illinois.
Wow.
And they run an elder care facility as part of the work that they do.
I love it.
There's a lot of incredible work, and I'd urge people to go and find, if they are Scottish by birth, by descent, or want to be Scottish, then please join us, and please look up your local societies.
Oh, I love it. And I mean, some of the biggest events that I've always seen that have the biggest Scottish flair are the Highland Games.
Yeah.
And I would almost say most likely almost every state has some type of Highland game. Are those types of events, are those things that you also get involved in?
So we support the ones that we can get to. Again, there are so many. They're so varied and throughout the country. My deputy, Ailey, was at the New Hampshire Games and was just astounded by the quality of the pipe and drums. They were there, were very high. But the love and affection for Scotland is amazing. And again, it's something that I would encourage people to get out and have a look at. And it's a bit more about engaging with the culture of Scotland and how that's actually merged with the culture in the US. Because Scots have been here for so long, there's a huge amount of joint shared history and shared culture, which also makes it great fun and very accessible.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point there with the shared culture and this idea of cultural diplomacy.
Yeah.
And I love the concept of the contact sport it's perfect. And the idea that you can have soft power be a gateway to entry with music, with whiskey. So, I mean, could you talk a little bit about how does that all work together? What's the drive to, obviously I love it. I know it, but I mean, for people who have Scottish background, what's a driver between pipes and drums, whiskey? Like, what brings that all together?
I think that the connection is that we are able to take things that people feel a real association to. So at Scotland, we're very unlucky. People recognise tartan, it's Scotland.
Yeah.
People recognise Scotch, it's Scotland. People recognise the pipes and drums as having the Scottish origins. And there's a huge amount of warmth towards that. And then using that from my perspective as a diplomat to say to people, you love this. Did you know?
Yeah.
Here's what modern Scotland does as well. So you love whiskey. Some of the whiskey distilleries and our lovely gin distilleries as well, we've got a lot of gin in Scotland, are now carbon negative or carbon positive.
Yeah.
So they are actually sequestering carbon and producing spirits that are world leading and incredible and taste amazing and have that link back hundreds and hundreds of years, but are taking a very modern take on it. There's a lot of gender work in whiskey. So we're actually saying, did you know that you may imagine old white men with beards are the people who make whiskey? Actually, there's these really innovative women at every stage in the process. And this is what modern Scotland looks like. The movies, Rob Roy, Braveheart, all of that stuff is fantastic. And we don't want to forget our history. But Scotland's now also one of the leading manufacturers of small satellites in the world, and has spaceports in development. So there's this lovely mix between ancient historic Scotland and modern Scotland, and it's something that the tattoo does really well by mixing the past and the pipes and drums. And I've heard you guys explain it during the show. Here's where it came from. Here's where it's been. Here's what it is now and what it can be in the future. Right. And we see the impact that it's had on the US military pipes and drums, fife and drum corps, and the wonderful stuff that you've brought to the table. And what does it do for me as a diplomat? It puts me in spaces with people who feel very well disposed to you. Maya Angelou said, people won't always remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. What people feel when they're around the pipes and drums, when they're around the Washington tattoo, is a real warmth, a sense of community that I think is very hard to find anywhere else. And that then puts us in a position to have conversations with people about things that matter for the Scottish and US economies, for knowledge exchange, higher education, culture, diaspora. It's a brilliant, brilliant tool that we have. And, being a Scottish diplomat, I recognise it's something that not everyone has. And I'm very lucky to have that and have these connections.
No, I love this. And Chris, it's so well said, but you're encapsulating this very large concept. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to these exchanges, and you can have an exchange in education, you can have an exchange in business ideas, you are laying the groundwork for people just to come and meet and exchange. And I know that there's a large population of university alumni that are in the Washington, D.C. area, but also in the States. So are there connections between the Scottish government and also the educational systems between Scotland and the United States?
So a lot of that is held at sort of individual university level. So just last week, I made a connection between Duquesne University and the University of Glasgow, one of my old alma mater, because I met someone from Duquesne at an event through a Scottish connection. And they realised that there's a twinning process between Pittsburgh and Glasgow. They decided to follow that up, so now there's a connection being made there. We work a lot with alumni of Scottish universities, and those very clear those are not Scottish alumni, they're alumni of Scottish universities, because right now there are over 6,000 US students in Scotland. You match that up year on year over years, there are hundreds of thousands of graduates of Scottish universities here in the US who hopefully have walked away from Scotland with a lovely memory of the time they spent there, were welcomed there, and then feel warm towards Scotland. And that's how we make some of those business connections, and that's how we make some of the higher education connections. We also work with alumni. We bring them to events. Then we say, come meet a minister, come meet the head of the Scottish government, come chat to us about what you do. No ask. Let's just create relationships. Let's create connections, as you say. And those things for me can pay off long term, short term. It might just be a nice personal relationship to have. There's value in all of those things for us.
Well, and I love it too, because at that point, when you're speaking on this level, you're talking about trust, and there's speed and trust. And when you get from a point of view where, is it just relational? Is it business driven? Is it transformational? And we have a lot of conversations, and Jesse Seif and I chat about this quite a bit, where you say, is it transactional or is it transformational? And obviously, when you have young professionals, young educators, being taught in Scotland, they're going to have a memory of how special that time was. And during my time when I got to go visit the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo the last couple summers, we were sitting amongst business leaders that were in the Royal Gallery, and they had all brought their children there. And they said, when I was a kid, my father brought me here, and this intergenerational education meeting business really seems like the Scottish government has a very beautiful knack on how that looks back into the past, but also into the future. And you're bringing this idea of energy sustainability, carbon idea of having a net zero, and that I would imagine has got to be something where you have to stay leaning forward on the newest technologies and the newest businesses. So what are some of the conversations you're having to improve, and also to rely on what is the next step forward with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Scotland has a really ambitious carbon neutrality target for 2045, which we know is going to be really, really hard to hit. But right now we can produce just about 100% of our electricity needs on any given day from renewables. We're hoping to make that grow by almost 5 times with a lot of offshore wind, which we've recently consented, which a lot of US companies are involved in, and it's beginning to show the way for what's possible for offshore wind. that offshore wind can be turned into green hydrogen. That hydrogen can be used for the domestic economy, also to be exported as well.
Wow.
So we're really interested in that. And in recent years, we've seen that Europe has had a dependence on oil and gas from potentially not the most favourable of sources.
Sure.
And we believe the green hydrogen can replace that and create energy security within Europe. And we know that the US energy security is a key part of national security and economic security. I think Europe's learned that in a slightly harsh way over the last few years.
Yeah.
We don't expect that Scottish green hydrogen will be exported to the US. We welcome the Inflation Reduction Act and what that's brought to the green economy in the US. What we would like to see is partnerships with the US, investment from the US to help Scotland be the hydrogen hub for Europe and help make sure that Europe greens as a whole, not just Scotland doing it in isolation by ourselves.
No, and it's a really good point that you bring that up. And in these events that do take place, you can put the same people in the room to at least have a relaxed setting, have a whiskey, enjoy some music. And I think that's where this soft power has the most amount of effect, right? And you and I have also talked quite a bit about a very interesting book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
And so it's not only that does a tattoo or does a music event have feel good power, but you can actually make something happen with the follow-up. And one of the things we did talk about was mental health. And I know that's a passion of yours as well. And when we talk about mental health and the event that we had in April, I think having the Ukrainian defense attaché there, especially in light of what's going on in the Ukraine and what does their veterans assistance programs look like, and that partnership between the American Department of the Veterans Affairs and then the British counterpart and then the UK counterpart, and then specifically saying in Scotland there's this history of how music makes people feel.
Yeah.
And so I know from a mental health perspective, what are some things that you feel are ways that we can move forward using the arts as a tool?
So I think that's a great point and a great question. And The Body Keeps the Score is a book that we have chatted about. I think, and I'm the senior sponsor for mental health and wellbeing for the UK-wide for the Foreign Office in the US. So it is something really close to my heart. I think those feelings of community and bringing people together around music are extremely important. Also the opportunity to express yourself in ways that you might not feel otherwise able to do through the arts, whether it is music, whether it's theatre, whether it's painting, whether it's sculpting, whatever you want to do, people need to have an outlet to be able to express themselves. I think that the tattoo is amazing for that. And just building on that point about Ukraine, we had an event for wounded soldiers, which you came to, send-off event for the Catherine Yomp in the Scottish Highlands over the summer. The Ukrainian Defence Attaché came to that event months after the tattoo event. He walked straight up to me, first person he came to see, to say hello and thank you. And that really meant something to me as well. So it shows that these things, that how you feel, how things make you feel really sticks.
Right.
And it has a big impact on people. But for me, I've known playing music all my life. It's a great outlet.
Yeah.
It's something that works for me. And if it helps other people do it, we know that it can help people with PTSD.
Right.
We know it can help people with all sorts of different issues. And I know that that's something that the Tattoo have been really exploring and developing over the past months and years.
Right. And it's a very interesting point. I'm going to give a shout out to Steve Small real quick with the Edinburgh Tattoo. When we first had our initial meeting, this is March of 2020, so this is just before COVID really exploded. We were in front of the castle with Sir Melville Jameson talking about this special relationship between the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo and the Washington Tattoo. And Stevie asked me, he said, "Why are you doing this?" And I think it was with that like, well, I'm going to measure this. I'm going to try to, like, is this something you're doing for self-gratification? Are you doing this for money? Why would you want to do a tattoo? And when you come down to it, when you do any kind of startup, it's not glorious work. It's very difficult. It's hours and hours and hours in. And what really has been the underpinning of this has been the mental health conversation, especially with veterans. And when you speak about General Boris, when he came up and said hello that evening, he had tears in his eyes after hearing the Ukrainian national anthem. And that was one of the pieces in April that really struck me was people, when they are in a warfighter situation, feel alone. They're away from their families, they're scared. And no matter how hardened somebody is, there's this what if, what if? And music starts to unify that identity of the individual. It gets into the mentality of building the team, the fight songs or the alma maters that are out there. But when we were together and we watched that happen, you could feel it in the room.
Yeah.
And what it started to get into at that point also is that there are other people other than veterans that can be helped with music. And I know that you all have a very strong relationship with some schools in the area, and I think there's a program that also is in connection with the embassy. So how does that work? What does that relationship look like?
Yeah, so this is something that full credit to Bex Norris and my team. She led the development of this, the Embassy Adoption Program, where we reach out through the DC public schools, to schools to say, here's some learning about international life. So we've gone out over the past few years to schools across DC, taught them a bit about Scotland, about what the culture is like, what we do, what modern Scotland is like, explained that Nessie's real and that haggis can be caught at a certain time of the year. And more recently, we've been involving the tattoo in it as well to help reach out to those kids. And they absolutely loved it. This year, when they came to the embassy to do their capstone event at the very end, they were all asked to bring something that they'd taken from it. And several of them had drawn themselves little pipe and drum kits to take in. So
I love it.
It clearly made a big impact on them as well.
Well, and I love this, and I'm going to do a little quick shout out to your father. I am very glad that he picked the correct instrument. That's a drummer to a drummer. Well, and it's interesting you bring this up because when the concept first came out about the mental health piece, the reaching out to kids, and of course, there's the inspiration behind it, and that's fun. And the music wellness piece in mental health has becoming more and more of a pillar on how to create wellness for folks in recovery. But what also happened, we did a performance at Hardy Middle School, which is also close to the British International School, in April. And a dear friend of mine, Dr. Bob Roach, is the band director there. And the school has a lot of students that are coming from underprivileged homes and at-risk youth populations. And so one of the things that I feel is a net gain with our relationship is that we're impacting students in Washington, D.C. that really don't necessarily have any connection to Scotland at all.
Yeah.
But through the example of Scottish cultural diplomacy, we're giving kids opportunity and they're inspired to learn deeper into maybe not just Scottish culture, but their own culture.
Yeah.
And that can be Italian, African American, Hispanic, and anything really to say the idea of the tartan is world renowned, and this concept of that you can choose to be Scotland, I really love that. So a question I have too is, in your role here, what are some things that you feel like have been obviously very impactful, but what do you see moving forward as some of the things that you'd like to continue to do?
I think number one for me is one of the things that we do together is connection. But I think that Scotland needs to have a better connection to the US. We need to connect in the right ways. We need to show what the history, the shared history, and the future. And one of the ways I'd love to do that, I'd love to expand the Friends of Scotland caucus on the Hill. That's amazing. I'd love to expand the work we do with the tattoo, push that further. I'd also love for our Scottish societies to be open and further open and expand into communities. A lot of them do fantastic work with scholarships and with charity. I'd love for them to open that out to more and more people, whether it's more diverse communities, whether it's more diverse in terms of gender, whether it's more diverse in terms of the activity they undertake. Get out there in front of people and share with them. And I think when you do that, you get more back from it. So that's a big thing for me. But I also know, with my hard-headed economic development hat on, that the US is Scotland's #1 international trade and investment partner. So for me, I want to see the numbers constantly go up.
Yeah.
More trade, more back and forth between Scotland and the US, more air routes open, more higher education and diaspora and cultural collaboration.
Right.
The tattoo is a big part of that, because you attract people, you bring people into that ecosystem of understanding the connections between Scotland and the US, and it's something that we really value.
No, and I love that too, because I also know that United has opened up these pathways between Washington and Edinburgh, Washington and Glasgow, and I think there are some other airlines now doing the same thing.
I think JetBlue have just announced a route between New York and Edinburgh, so that's another one. Atlanta and Edinburgh opened up earlier this year as well. So the more the better. It creates that dialogue between the countries and makes it easier for people to get back and forth and to see the benefits of the relationship, I think.
Well, and honestly, too, this has been an interesting question because we've been doing some homework on the psychology between Hollywood and the movies, and this idea of the Outlander effect, I would imagine has got to be phenomenal for cultural tourism.
It is, yeah. We've had a lot of people come to Scotland because of Outlander, and I met Sam Hewen just a couple of weeks ago, and I thanked him for his unflinching work and for his quite nice whiskey as well, the Sassenach.
Is it good?
It is good, yes. I obviously have to say that, but it is good. It's very good. It has done very well. I think Outlander is number 2 in the TV programmes that have inspired tourism anywhere in the world. I think Game of Thrones might be number 1. Outlander is definitely number 2. But we've seen Scottish culture and the Scottish cultural industry has benefited massively in recent years from an influx of productions in Scotland and an influx of TV and media. So you've got Outlander, but Andor, the Disney series, the spin-off from Star Wars, was filmed largely in Scotland.
I didn't know that.
Look at all the landscapes.
Yeah.
You might recognise some Scottish hills in the background, quite a few Scots in the cast. But we've had Netflix, Amazon, Disney, all locating in Scotland to do big series. We've had some of the Batman movies and things like that all filmed in and around Glasgow. Indiana Jones was filmed in Glasgow.
Incredible.
So this opening up and connection of the sort of cultural industries has been fantastic. And obviously America's film and TV industry is based in the West Coast, so I will be spending some time there myself in the next year to help try and deepen those relationships. And I'm sure some of my ministers will be here as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think that is it's not an untapped resource, but the way that it's connected maybe has so many deeper roots than we really expect.
We're doing great just now. We're really pleased with the way the film and TV and the culture industry in Scotland is growing. We know it can do more, and we know the value that it can add to the US. And actually having greater Scottish visibility in the US can only be a good thing for us.
Right, and I think,
One more shout out. As of Christmas this year, I graduated of the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Cootie-Gatwa.
Nice.
Will be Doctor Who. So we're looking forward to seeing him as a new Doctor Who, a Scottish Doctor Who again after a couple of years.
That's fantastic. And I know there are so many connections between New York, Chicago, LA, Washington, that these are really just the beginnings of conversations. So for me, I would love to continue this, and maybe we have an episode 2 in a few years when you're in maybe another position and we see where we're at there. But so, I mean, if people wanted to get involved, obviously we have the Diaspora organizations that are there, but if they wanted to find out more information specifically about the work with the Scottish government in the US, what are some ways that people could learn more about the efforts here?
So we have LinkedIn and Twitter profiles, or X profiles, which are the Scottish government in the USA. Fairly easy to find. We also have, if people want to be part of our mailing list, we send mail shots out with upcoming events, things that are happening in Scotland across culture, across policy, across everything that we do. There's an email address which is not the easiest to remember, so we might need to put it out there in some notes. washi.scottishaffairs@fcdo.gov.uk. Trips off the tongue. We might have to put a written note of that one in there. But if people write into that, we will happily add them to the mailing list, and we'll shoot out as much information as we can out there so people can learn a bit more about Scotland and the US.
That's perfect. And so if other businesses or organizations want to partner with the government, are there some events coming up in the next few months that people can maybe look out for?
Yeah, we run events through the years. The pillars of those are generally around the big Scottish holidays. So St Andrew's Day, our patron saint, St Andrew's Day is the end of November, and particularly Scottish societies will be running a lot of events around the end of November, very start of December. We run a couple of small things here in DC. Burns season, Robert Burns, our national poet, Auld Lang Syne, A Man's a Man for all that. All these sensationally beautiful pieces of work. That happens towards the end of January. We'll have a Burns event here in DC at the embassy in January, but my team will also be traveling across the US to events in LA, to New York, Chicago, Boston, all over Baltimore. So there's a lot of events that people can engage with there. And then, of course, there is Tartan Day and Tartan Week, which we discussed. We'll be having events here. There'll be events all over the place. And there's the large, joyous event that is the Tartan Day Parade on the 6th of April next year, which is free to take part in. It's obviously free to attend and see. I would encourage people who are interested to go and have a look at that and to come and join us and feel Scottish, whether you are Scottish by birth, descent or choice. You're more than welcome to join us. And one I almost forgot about, which is in the coming weeks, is Alexandria, the city just down the road from us here in DC, which has a Scottish Christmas parade the first weekend in December, which is always a fantastic and fun affair. And this year comes with a Taste of Scotland event all around it as well, so you can taste the food and drink that represents Scotland as well, which should be great fun.
Amazing. Well, Chris, thank you so much for the time today, and this has been an honor. It's been great to know you as a friend, but as a person, but as a professional. I just want to say thank you so much for your mentorship and guidance in these spaces, and I look forward to what we can do together in the future to make, honestly, humanity and our connections even better.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thanks, Mark. It's always a pleasure.
Cheers.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Riley again. We want to share a great opportunity with you to get your business name out to our listeners. We are looking for individual episode and yearly sponsors for the Washington Tattoo Podcast. So if you love music, history, and want to support military veterans, please take this step with us and consider being a sponsor. For information on that, please email marketing@thewashingtontattoo.com.
This message is from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. For PSAs on the best services available to veterans, go to VA's new radio outreach page, news.va.gov/outreach/radio.